the recording of the event.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Colin.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Colin. And I'll also request other panelists to kindly switch on the video.
Hello,
We'll
can you
start
hear
in a
me?
couple of minutes. Yes, Colin, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay, so I should stop talking. I think, Doris, you're telling me you can hear me, so.
Okay.
I don't think you can hear us, but we can hear you.
I'm good. No, I cannot hear you. If you're talking to me, I do not hear you. That's the problem.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Oh.
So, Edie, my apologies.
It's perfectly fine. Thanks so much.
Practically early.
Yes, we are ready. Okay, so I'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining this webinar, which is part of DMU's two-day national conference on monitoring and evaluation. This session is being organized by Clear JPAL South Asia and is the last webinar of day one of the conference. The topic of our session is scaling impact to millions. What does it take from an evidence and implementation lens? And we have an exciting line of speakers. In case you have any questions during the session, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will be monitoring that and bring them up during the Q&A part of the webinar later. We are also recording today's event and are also live streaming the event on the Niti Aayog YouTube channel. And finally, if you are on Twitter and you wish to tweet about the webinar, please use the hashtag IndiaMelfConf, which is written on the next slide as we move on, and you can use that to kind of tweet about the webinar as well. I will now hand it over to Dr. Sagan Savarwal, who is moderating today's session. And I will quickly introduce her as well. So Sagan is the Director of Policy Training and Communications at JPAL South Asia. And she's also the Director of Clear South Asia. She leads JPAL's South Asia's work with government donors and civil society organizations to initiate new research, disseminate policy lessons, and scale up evidence-based programs. And as the Director of Clear South Asia, she promotes the center's mission to strengthen MNE of the policymakers in the region through capacity building engagements. She is currently also the PI for a process evaluation and an RCT on the adaptation of the graduation approach by the government, and we will be discussing the graduation approach today in our webinar as well. Sagan previously has worked with 3IE and Population Council, and she's completed her PhD from Harvard. Over to you, Sagan, and thank you so much for moderating the session today.
Thanks a lot, Sohini, and a very, very warm welcome to all the audience who have joined for this panel discussion today, and also for my fellow panelists. So it's really exciting to be here today on day one of the DMEO conference. You know, those of you who were there in the morning as well, it's been a really exciting day. And we heard some really interesting discussions around institutionalizing monitoring and evaluation, outcomes monitoring, and so many other different topics. So the topic that we have today for our panel, as it is clear from the title, is really looking at how do we take a program that has been incubated, perhaps by NGOs in different contexts, and how do we take it to then so that it reaches millions of people and have government actors adopt this kind of a program, and what is the role that monitoring and evaluation can play in this entire process. So that is more from a, you know, more from a philosophical level. But more immediately, I would say that, you know, one of the things that the pandemic has really brought to light is the fact that our own capacity to understand and diagnose the problem and the multifaceted nature of the different types of challenges, you know, different citizens face, especially in low and middle income countries. For us to really understand the true picture, it's really, really important to have monitoring and evaluation. And at the same time, also think about how we can use the evidence that is emerging from different contexts and really bring that evidence to bear in the policy making and bring it to the decision makers who are really grappling with a lot of these challenges. So the theme or the sub-theme to which this topic really fits in well is around translating evidence into action. And hopefully, you know, in today's discussion, we will be able to discuss some of the really important challenges and successes and how we go about doing that using a specific example. I will be introducing my panelists as we go along, but before I did that, I just wanted to also say that, you know, we have a really diverse panel today, and we have voices from many different sort of stakeholders groups. So joining me today is, I'll start by saying is Colin Andrews, who is with the Platforms for Economic Inclusion at the World Bank. And he's going to be talking a little bit more from a more global perspective on his experience in working with different economic inclusion programs and working closely with governments across different countries. We also have Doris King, who is you know, representing the donor community, and she is from Co-Impact, which many of you may know is an organization that is really trying to bring together the systems-driven approach to have sustained change at scale. Then we also have among us Mr. Bala, who is an IS officer and is the CEO of Jivika. And so we will also be hearing the government perspective to this entire process and what the needs and challenges are from a government's perspective. And finally, we also have Mr. Chaudhary, who is from Bandhan Konagar, which is an NGO that has been working, to implement this particular approach in India for multiple years, and he's actively working to support the government of Bihar. So, and of course, I am here representing JPAL, and I bring the researcher perspective as well as the perspective of someone who's been in this evidence to policy space. So I'm hoping for a really, very deep dialogue and maybe some discussions and debates, and really hoping to also hear a lot of questions from all of you. So before I start, I'll just quickly say a few things about the format of the session today. So I'll start off by giving a very short presentation to just bring everyone on the same page with respect to this particular, approach that we will be talking about in more details. Then I will be inviting all my panelists to say a few things about the different, the work that they are doing from the both international and also the Bihar context. And then finally, we will move into a moderated discussion where I will be asking some questions to the panelists, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So now, without further ado, let me just quickly talk a little bit about this program. So one of the main motivations for how the genesis of this program happened was the fact that, of course, governments around the world, and especially in low and middle income countries, have been investing in many efforts for many years to reach poor and to build these social protection systems that can really provide support and enable the poor to access different types of services, and also be resilient to any kind of economic shocks that they may face. But when BRAC started designing this program in Bangladesh, so this program is called the graduation approach. It has also been referred to as targeting the ultra poor, targeting the hardcore poor. But one of the things that they realized in 1990s in Bangladesh was the fact that there is this segment of population which are almost like these poorest of the poor that face multiple challenges and multiple dimensions of poverty, because of which they are unable to access the services that are provided to them. And there are programs that need to be specifically designed to take care for the needs of these people. And just to say, what are some of these key constraints? They really sometimes are not registered. They don't have identity cards. They don't even have enough money to save on a regular basis. And as a result, their needs are very different from, the majority of poor. So as a result of this, BRAC had designed this particular program which I was referring to as the graduation approach. Next slide, please, Bhakti. And it really targets these very extreme poor in any given society. And of course, the context also matters, and poverty is relative. But the overall focus of this program is to say that this is a program that is time bound in nature, and there is a sequence set of support that it provides to these ultra poor households. And the ultra poor households also have certain features that they use to really identify and target these households, and the targeting is done using community-based approaches, wealth ranking. And then the idea is that with these to these ultra poor households, you give them an injection of capital, which is usually in the form of an asset transfer. And this asset could be in the form of a livestock, or it could be like a small enterprise. And then you also provide them a lot of hand-holding support and a lot of training, so that they are able to diversify this asset and use it to have more sustainable livelihood options. So you're kind of moving them away from this very vulnerable situation to more sustainable livelihoods by providing this sequence set of support. And then the idea is that after 24 months, it's not that these people are graduating and they are no longer poor and that all support stops, but rather they get integrated into mainstream services from which they were earlier disconnected. And what we also saw in our work with Bihar, and Mr. Bala will also talk a little bit more about it, that when the poorest of the poor face large economic shocks, such as the one that was caused by pandemic, then this type of approach really helps them be in touch or be connected with the government social protection system. So in a way, they're quite invisible in some ways, and this program is making them visible. This program is making them be more accessible. Next slide, please, Bhakti. So this, like I said, this approach was first started in Bangladesh, but then the question was that, will this also work in different contexts? Will this work if other organizations were to implement this? And as a result of that, CGAP and Ford Foundation undertook pilots of this program across multiple geographies around the world. And these were implemented by different NGOs, and randomized evaluations were conducted of these different programs in these different countries. And in India, this program was implemented by Bandhan Konagar in Murshidabad district of West Bengal. And Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo did an evaluation of this, and they also tracked these beneficiaries over time. And what we find is that as a result of this program, these households are definitely, they have many more improved economic outcomes, but these economic outcomes also sustain over time. And the very latest study that we have now, which was where they looked at these households 8.5 years later. Next slide, please, Bhakti. They find that their savings are a lot more. They are doing much better on many other indicators as compared to those who did not receive this type of program. And some of the mechanisms that Esther and Abhijit have mentioned in their paper is that one, because of this focus where they are able to move to these sustainable livelihoods, they translate these early gains into diversifying economic activities. And later on, they are also able to make use of opportunities such as aspirational migration that allows them to increase their income. So these are very, very promising results. And as a result of all of this, there is a lot of support that this particular program has garnered over the years. Next slide, please, Bhakti. And at JPAL South Asia, we have been working with many different state governments in India to have this particular program become a part of the social protection strategy of these different state governments. And in Bihar, it has been really, really promising for us when in 2018, the government of Bihar announced the SJY program, which is an adaptation of the graduation approach. And this program is now being scaled to 100,000 households across all of the 38 districts of the state. So we will be talking a little bit more about the SJY scheme as well in the panel discussion today. So with this, I will quickly finish my, end my presentation. Next slide, Bhakti. And I would now like to invite Colin Andrews to start us off by saying a little bit about PEI's focus on the graduation approach and his work with different countries as well. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Sagan. I hope you can hear me okay. Perfect. Well, look, thanks. It's really such an honor to be here at this conference. I'm really appreciative that people have stayed for the whole day for this final session, and I hope we can create a really great and dynamic session for you. Just by way of my own introduction, I am the program manager for the Partnership for Economic Inclusion, which is a partnership hosted at the World Bank within our social protection and jobs global practice. This partnership is really a new start partnership established 18 months ago. And our central mission is really to support governments looking to scale up economic inclusion programs in a cost-effective and in a sustainable manner. The partnership includes a number of NGO, UN organizations, as well as interfaces across the bank itself. If it's okay, what I thought I would do just in my opening remarks is just address the central challenge and really to try and frame that a little bit more, but then to pick up on three messages around opportunities to scale. So my impression at times, and I'm not an M&E specialist, but my impression is sometimes it's really easy for us to jump into our technical comfort zone on what indicators are smart and different things like that. But before we get there, let me address the theories of change and some of the opportunities that I see. First, I think Sagan laid the framework really well, so I really appreciate that. It saves me from having to do anything in terms of the motivation for these programs and the central issues. But when we talk about these programs to many different government counterparts, the central question we get is, well, look, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and doesn't growth macroeconomic growth just kind of solve this problem in any case. And of course, we know that that is not the situation. The central question that we're trying to address in this session today and under the Partnership of Economic Inclusion and under our respective works is how to change the economic lives of the extreme poor. And what does changing the economic lives of the extreme poor actually look like in the first place? We know that this is a very complicated and dynamic question as we look at poverty trends, as we look at the levels of extreme poverty, as we look at the COVID-19 impacts. But if we also take a step back, we know that for these population cohorts will remain informal in the informal economy, most likely for most of their lives. Opportunities to formalize jobs for the majority will be fairly limited. So what does it take to get these populations involved in the local economy? What are these economic opportunities? How do we address these population groups who are forced into essentially poverty traps that can last generations? These are the central questions that we're trying to address with a big push type of interventions. So I think often for our government counterparts, positioning this discussion as part of a continuum, positioning this discussion around what opportunities look like at the household and community level is often very important just to reinforce. And this brings us to the theme of scale. At the Partnership for Economic Inclusion, we just published a new publication as part of our first year. We really wanted to lay the ground and lay the technical foundations of our work a little bit more clearly. So we were delighted in collaboration with many organizations here today, actually, to produce the State of Economic Inclusion report and have that launched over the last couple of months. And the focus of the report really looks at this question of the potential of moving to scale. And let me put three arguments on the table to consider and to help frame some of the discussion to follow. So the first opportunity of scale, obviously, is connecting this discussion to a discussion on national frameworks or state frameworks, state strategies, state policies. This type of discussion, of course, is absent if you have smaller scale programs. So beyond just looking at the interventions and the outcomes at the household and the community level, what does this look like from a systems level? So where is this dialogue in terms of moving this discussion within a policy lens? The report that we just published has one really interesting finding. As we looked at the global landscape and as we assessed over 200 programs, the landscape was shifted evenly between implementing organizations of non-governmental organizations as well as government-led partners. But when you looked at the reach of those programs, 95% of beneficiaries are actually coming underneath government-led programs. So the reach and the opportunities to scale under the government-led interventions become really important. That is not in any way to say that the role of smaller NGO-led programs is insignificant. I think the large push on these interventions is to see how different partners can come together and deliver programs which are relatively more complex and less straightforward than some other interventions. The second opportunity of scale is the ability to build on interventions that are already working. And this becomes critically important as you think about how institutions can come together and work. I think one challenge for the graduation community has been the idea of a big push, the idea of multidimensional interventions is not a unique idea. So this idea has also captivated people who have been working in the safety nets community for many years, people who have been working underneath agricultural interventions since the 1970s and different things like that, and before, I would say. I think one of the very interesting findings of our work was that as we assessed the landscape for graduation and economic inclusion programs, there was a whole array of this activity in different sectors. Sometimes people talking different names and different languages, but essentially everybody trying to work towards a big push intervention. And as we think about scale, and as we think about that opportunity of building on what works, we're seeing a lot of discussion now on those interventions in social protection and doing more with safety nets, but also on the question around the livelihood interventions as well, and how you can build interventions in a way that the Javika and the SJY program is a very good example, and we'll hear more. And then my final remark would be political economy. So, as a group of technocrats and M&E experts, I think we can all get into our comfort zone looking at the design interventions and various implementation modalities that work and do not work. But the question of scale puts different questions first and foremost on the table, and that's the issue of trade-offs. And I think the questions of trade-offs, including the objectives of the program, who the program will target, that income group, becomes very different and sometimes becomes quite inverted and challenged when you look at a government-led program, because there will be demands to address different population groups, different cohorts, and how you maintain a focus on your intervention, on your population group, on that particular poverty level can become stretched and it can become challenged. So with that, let me pass over the floor back over to you. But I hope in terms of just framing some discussions and framing some later debate, that might be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Colin. I think you've left us with some really very thoughtful comments, and I think that it will be really good to build on some of these comments as we discuss this further. Now I would like to invite Mr. Bala to take us through in more details the work that is happening in Bihar. But before I hand over to you, sir, I just wanted to quickly introduce you. So Mr. Bala is an IS officer with over a decade of experience in civil services. And currently he is the Chief Executive Officer of the Bihar Rural Livelihoods Promotion Society, which is also known as Jivika. And he has been spearheading these efforts to scale and to design, implement and scale the SJY program. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shahun, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Colin, for mentioning about Jivika's program in your small presentation. Let me take a minute or two to explain about Jivika first. It was started in 2006, designed in 2006 with the help of World Bank funding by Government of Bihar, and then it was started in 6 districts as a pilot. After its successful implementation, seeing the progress, Government of Bihar decided to implement this program throughout Bihar. Right now, this program is being implemented in all 534 blocks. That's a sub-district as mentioned here, in all villages in Bihar. So as you see in the presentation, we have right now mobilized more than 12 million families. That's actually, we work through women. So we call them as Didis in Hindi. So I'm going to mention as Didis only. We mobilized more than 12 million Didis into a million plus SHGs. So that is the basic structure. And then we have village organization and then cluster level federation. The basic idea of Jivika, actually this is a state rural livelihood mission, which is also implementing NRLM program, because most of you must be knowing about National Rural Livelihood Mission. This Jivika program came into being before NRLM came into being. So the basic idea is to address the issue of rural poverty by building the capacity of the community. So as you see, build demand side capacity for effective engagement. And also this is a huge social infrastructure through which we can, as it is mentioned in the presentation, it's a plug and play model where this particular platform can be used to deliver so many programs of Government of Bihar and also government, and also for effective targeting. Right now we have, as I mentioned, more than 60,000 village organization, the secondary federation, where different kind of interventions are taken up: food, health related issues, convergence related aspects, and also economic activities like creating producer groups. These things happen at village organization level, and then you have cluster level federation. That is economic cluster and also a social cluster. So right now we have these many numbers of VIVO and DAS cluster level federation. So this is, I'm taking time. This particular structure is acting, it is helping us in the implementation of SJY also, this graduation approach. We are using this structure very effectively for the implementation. Next slide, please. How this program came into, introduced, and I need to recall Mr. Gautam walking and asking us to give time to explain about graduation program. I remember very distinctly he was asking time, and then we met for the first time. He explained about this program, and then he was asking us to do a pilot. So that's how we started. We started a pilot, and then after understanding the nitty-gritties of the program while doing the pilot and also understanding the finding outcomes, we decided to implement at state level. I need to thank state government, particularly Honorable Chief Minister, for accepting to take this program at scale. So this is a first program. As we are speaking right now, we already identified more than 1 lakh. Right now, 100,000 people in this. It's shown as we started with targeting for identification of 1 lakh households, but right now we already crossed 1 lakh 15. The idea is to identify all the ultra poor households and then include them in this program. At the investment of more than 120 million US dollars, we have very helpful partners in Jepal, Bandhan Konahar, PI. I remember Professor Hashmi's visit, and then we had a long discussion while preparing the guidelines, and then before going to the government, when we were preparing the presentation to take this idea to government, all these partners helped us to frame this program. Next slide. From 2018 onwards, next slide, please. So this is when I was talking about village organization, the very important aspect of this program is this is community-owned program. One more major difference is in this program, the members who are the families who are ultra poor, those who are getting identified, are becoming part of village organization, part of SHG movement, because the very fact is that the identification is done by village organization. So the ownership is with community. That is one of the most important aspect of this program. This is not done by some officials who are going and selecting the families and then trying to implement this program. This program is being implemented by community. That is strength of this program. The identification is, as I already explained, is being done by community, particularly by village organization, and then we have this confidence building component, very strong confidence building component. And then we have this, all aspects of this graduation approach. And the best part is we are trying to, customize based on our own understanding the, grounded realities. We have this entrepreneurship training and this asset creation aspect that is also, very thoroughly designed based on the field input and also partners' feedback. We have this, again, I don't want to take time because about the graduation program. We are, how many months of training and then asset transfer in 2 doses. But I would like to mention about few things. We have average asset investment of almost 40,000 Indian rupees right now, but we can invest up to 1 lakh rupees. We have enough resources. One of the major, again, advantage of this program is we have community resource persons. They are already in the field. So we have started using them, and then we have created a separate structure of community cadre called master resource persons. Again, that they are very useful. And I need to mention about our partners, Co-Impact, Bandhan Konahar, JPAL. They are helping us in designing this program. When I say designing, because it's work in progress, that's how I see. Because every time when we meet for evaluation, for sitting down to understand this program, we find out, okay, these are all the things which we need to improve. So nothing is written in black, which cannot be changed. So that is how we are approaching. We have a strong MIS, which is helping us to do the monitoring and evaluation. We have very good training modules, IC materials. We are also using our own, strength. We have a very good FI team, community finance team. So we use them to design books of records apart from taking inputs from partners. And I already mentioned about VO's role and then SHGs. So this is the, in essence, about important characteristics of this program. And we have 7 indicators for graduation. So household income, food security, increased saving, asset growth, safe and secure house, child immunization, education, access to social security, safe drinking water and sanitation. In fact, 9 indicators. They are, in fact, taking all these indicators to to measure whether the families are getting graduated or not. After implementing this program almost for last 2 years plus, I'm very confident this program is moving in the right direction. As per our feedback and then report from partners and then field, more than 5,000 families has been already graduated. So that's very very important message to us. So we are working on it, and I stop here because if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer. But this program is one of its kind in the entire maybe country. I'm not sure about the world. This is the first time I was told this at scale. This program is being done by government, by SRLM. The best part I already mentioned. This is being done by SHG-based program. So families are getting included. The major difference what we have seen in SHG program, even if you include ultra poor families, they cannot continue. We found them; they are dropping out from SHG because at SHG program we are not giving this kind of a specific training and then follow up at family level. That is the major difference between this ultra poor graduation model. We have one MRP supporting 25 to 30 families continuously, and then we are getting feedback. We have a dedicated structure of young professionals, district level, state level, and then field level structure that is helping us in the implementation. I stop here, Shagun, and I'll be happy to take any question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Bala. This was really very insightful, and of course I am aware of all the work that you're doing, but just seeing it all together, I think it really speaks well to some of the comments that Colin had raised during his opening remarks, specifically emphasizing the fact that how to integrate such multifaceted programs, you first have to look at the existing systems that exist, and the fact that, Mr. Bala, you have used and catalyzed the existing machinery that GVIC already had, but that you have further built on it by introducing these new cadres of frontline workers, by having dedicated program resources at all the levels from ground up, and how they are kind of working together. But also, very importantly, I think one of the unique features of this program is that it does require constant monitoring to ensure that all of these beneficiaries are being supported, they are being provided a wraparound series of support. And the fact that you have dedicated this MIS system and you're also generating this data reports, etc., from this MIS on a regular basis. There's a dashboard that I know, which is, really, that's giving us very real-time information. But then you're also having organizations such as JPAL and other organizations providing real-time, independent sort of data, so that everything can be triangulated to have the big picture. So I think this is really commendable. And again, it really ties really well with all the things that Colin mentioned in his opening remarks, that when we think about scale up, you also have to think about opportunities. And it's not just about the need and the problem, but how do we integrate it into what exists and where the problems are. With that, I would like to now invite our next panelist, Doris. So Doris King is the Associate Director of Programs at Co-Impact. And Doris, and Co-Impact very passionately talk about the way to bring about change is through a systems lens, and it is by building these winning coalitions and strengthening organizational capabilities. And Co-Impact has been supporting this work that, where all the partners are together working in Bihar, and they have been really bringing in very important perspectives that are really helping inform, the work of all of us. So I would now like to invite Doris to share her opening remarks. Over to you, Doris.
Thank you so much, Sagan, and hello and good evening to everyone. So by way of introduction, I'm Doris King, Associate Director with Co-Impact, and leading our support to our program partners in the graduation and economic inclusion space. And I'm so glad to be here with you all today and with my panelists who have set me up so well with the framing on the broad level and on the ground level as well. So that makes my life a lot easier. So maybe I'll start by telling you a little bit about Co-Impact first. So we at Co-Impact is a philanthropic pooled fund that supports systems change initiatives in the areas of education, health, and economic opportunities. We focus on supporting program partners to transform systems and contribute to impact at scale, because we think that working with systems holds huge potential, as we've seen from Mr. Bala describing the social infrastructure that's been built through Jivika. And it enables the institutionalizing of change to achieve much greater scale and enduring impact. Many elements of what we try to solve as well in social change have a deep roots in fundamental inequalities, such as around gender and other forms of marginalization. So working with systems, we think, will also provide an unparalleled opportunity to really tackle these things at the core, tilt systems, become more inclusive, just and equitable. So really, then what part does co-impact play in this vision of systems change? What we do is we generally provide long-term funding and support of 5 years to our partners to achieve their systems change vision. And this is somewhat long haul for philanthropic terms, which are normally max 2 or 3 years. And we take a program partner centric approach, which really means we see our partners as being in the driving seat of their initiative. In our multi-year ongoing support, we particularly try to support our partners to think about how to maintain an outcomes focus, both on what they hope to achieve for the people on the ground and then the changes they want to see in their system, how to place gender at the core of systems and to strengthen their organizations and find strategic coherence in what they pursue and how they pursue it. So then bringing me to why I'm here today with my fellow panelists. We've had the honor of being supporters of the set of graduation and economic inclusion initiatives of our partners on the ground in Bihar, Jivika, Bandhan and JPAL, and also the Partnership of Economic Inclusion housed at the World Bank, which Colin gave us the opening intro to at the global level. And finally, we also support program partners from Dash and Capital in Latin America, that's working with governments to implement the graduation approach. And really, in sharing with you, kind of from our funder perspective, what we found compelling about these initiatives, I want to start with what we were seeing in the lives of the people that the initiatives reach. So time and time again, what we hear and have had the chance to meet women, strong women who've been able to provide nutrition for their children, medicine for their ailing mother-in-law, speak for their fellow community members and dream big about their children and their own future as a result of the graduation program. A completely transformed person from who they were 18 to 25 months prior, when they've seldomly been outside of the house, isolated from the world and destitute, what Colin mentioned about the poverty trap. So really this transformative power of the graduation approach we found super compelling, transforming from one of extreme poverty and at best beneficiary to one of agency. And of course, it's not just the anecdotal stories, as Sagan has shown at the beginning. These highly promising results of graduation programming is well documented in the research by Professor Banerjee and team and others. And that's why, as Colin mentioned, we and so many others, including government leaders, are excited about taking on this approach and taking it to scale. And on systems level, and I feel like Colin might contradict me here, but we thought it was an equally powerful and simple idea of thinking how through the adaptation and adoption of these types of approaches can enable safety nets built by governments to have the opportunity to become springboards for growth and opportunity and an upward pathway for the extreme poor and for the local economies. So on both these levels, we were attracted by the simplicity of the transformational idea. But beyond great programming, what we look for is things that can really truly change the system. And this is going to take so much more than just a powerful idea. And so this really comes down to why we're partnering with who we're partnering with in India, Latin America, and globally, because we see these characteristics reflected through all of the partners. First is that there's a clear political will, government leadership and backing to want to do this. In each case, this is something the government partner really wants to do and lead on, as Mr. Bala had highlighted for us. And this gives hope that there is the ability to leverage the mass public system and social infrastructure to reach the extreme poor at scale. The second is how the partners are coming together, each bringing their strengths from the government side, the technical implementation side, the research side, to really navigate this together. And we're excited for what we're seeing on the local, national, and global level. And finally, as all our partners demonstrate, there's a curiosity of how to get to the root cause of the problem and a continuous commitment towards learning and adaptation. And this really is critical. It's almost cliche to say systems change is complex and non-linear, but it is. And this is where we see data, monitoring and evaluation having a really important role to play. Our partners have a commitment to a big vision, but really there's openness and flexibility in how to get there, and they need to maintain that and not be afraid to course correct and change as needed. And in that, the data M&E will be critically important tools for doing so. So with that, Sagan, I'd like to hand it back to you for the next part of the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Doris. And again, once again, some really very important comments. And I think the strategy that you have sort of outlined that Co-Impact is using in all of its work, I think is extremely important, especially thinking about intersectionality and thinking about gender lens. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you as the panel discussion progresses. Now I would like to invite Mr. Chaudhary from Bandhan Konagar. As you all know, Bandhan Konagar has been implementing this program, and they call it the Targeting the Hardcore Poor program, to almost 75,000 households in India, working in different states. And Mr. Chaudhary himself has about 35 years of experience in corporate and development sectors. And they are now providing technical advisory to Jivika for the implementation of SJY. And I'm sure Mr. Chaudhary is going to share some really great insights from his perspective. So Mr. Chaudhary, over to you.
Thank you, Sagan, for having me in this panel. And very good evening to my co-panelists and partners also, and very good morning to Doris and Colin. I would rather, like Sagan says, that I might bring in a practitioner's perspective here. And Bandhan Konagar being a very large NGO in India and working in different diverse fields and touching millions of lives, but our main flagship program has been and continues to be the Targeting Hardcore program, which we call here as Targeting the Hardcore Poor program, which is basically ultra-poor graduation program. And how we started is it came not from studies or other examples. It was our own experience. Some of you might know that Bandhan started as a microfinance organization as well in the early days. And while doing that and forming groups and doing this group-led lending systems, etc., so it was found that some of the ladies are not coming forward to take part in the groups, and even the group members were also not very keen to take them on board into the groups. And when we inquired, when we were curious and wanted to explore a little more, and we came to know that these ladies are basically neither they have the confidence to get into a group and engaging themselves into enterprise building, taking loan and repaying, etc. And also the community there, they felt that they really wouldn't be able to do that. So that was a kind of a situation of hopelessness and lack of confidence, we can say. And that's when we decided to have a different program from them, which we are now defining as a big push program and a multifaceted program for holistic upliftment of the poorest. So we thought that it is not going to work. Mere giving credit or mere training or giving some assets is not going to work. It has to be a bunch of services and well-sequenced services. And the target groups has to be identified properly so that, I mean, it should be inclusive, but unnecessary other elements and other influences shouldn't be there. So that's how we started way back in 2006. And at the same time, JPL also started their randomized controlled treatment evaluation of this graduation programs in many countries, including India. And it all started at that time in a backward district of West Bengal, Murshidabad, which Sharman has already mentioned. And JPL has studied the outcome and whether that is retained, the prosperities and the growth, stability, etc. are retained. They have studied it over last more than 10 years, and that has come in different articles. But I'm going back again to our work, Bandhan. And so basically, after that, with the success of that pilot, on our own stream, we tried to kind of replicate in other places. And we had a belief that this is working and this needs to be taken to so many other women who are left out and marginalized and vulnerable. These all came from our understanding of the realities, knowledge of the realities, ground realities there, that there are certain groups who are left out, who are completely marginalized and incapable of doing something on their own, and they needed this kind of a specific program intervention. And this belief has been ultimately, of course, has been acknowledged by the government, and in the 2011 socioeconomic caste census, the government has identified the deprived sections, which are largely women-headed families, and that's a huge number. And that recognition has also come that within the government system. So our belief that there are left people have been ultimately acknowledged by the government. Meanwhile, we have been replicating our work, and in the initial 5 years that there was a struggle, and we were doing on our own stream, as I said, but buoyed by the success and also getting some helps and support from different other partners, funding partners, international agencies, corporate partners. Last 10 years, we have been scaling up our efforts. And if we think in the year 2010-11, we were well, cumulatively we have touched only 10,000 families, whereas today we have touched more than 125,000 families. This way. So we have definitely been able to scale it up, and it has been evidence program that we have discussed a lot, and not only JPAL, in certain other programs, some leading consulting organizations like Deloitte and KPMG, they have also studied the program separately. Of course, those are impact evaluation, not such a long-term RCT evaluation, but they also found out in different projects that the asset growth, the income growth, and not falling back to the poverty trap, these things are evident. I mean, these things are quite evident and supported by the facts and data. So at that point, we felt that this program really needs to scale up, and it needs to be taken out to different corners of the country. And that to be done by one single NGO, and raising that kind of resources and mobilizing that kind of operational resources as well is really very difficult in such a large country like ours. So we were looking at possible partnerships where our experiences and knowledges can be shared to some other like-minded partners. And we, in the year 2014, we started with few NBFC MFIs, because some of the NBFC MFIs had their development wings, and we tried to kind of share our knowledge and expertise with them so that they can take it forward. And then it really didn't move very far. And then we started with an international NGO and in different states, West Bengal, Assam, and Bihar. In the meantime, we were also trying to do the advocacy. We are trying to demonstrate our work to different government agencies, because the government would be the right platform and who can handle this kind of a program at such a large scale. And in association with JPAL, we actually got an opportunity which was supported by USAID in the year 2014 or 14-15, that was a program to build a pathway towards scaling up. That's how in 2 states, in Odisha and Bihar, we created some demonstration models with couple of thousands in each state. And then with the results, we approached the government, and like Mr. Balamurugan said, that like Gautam's visit to him and explaining to him that how this is a program and it works for a particular specific community. And that's how we got associated with governments. More or less at the same time, Rajasthan government and Jharkhand government also tried it out, but Bihar government decided to do it, and I think in association with World Bank's involvement there also, they wanted to do a pilot in 2 blocks of Bihar, 2 quite difficult blocks of Bihar. And after a couple of years, when the success is visible, then as Mr. Balamurugan explained, then the government took it up and adopted the program. And we discussed and decided that this program needs some kind of adjustments and innovations and structural changes also, strategic changes also to suit the government infrastructure, government operational structure, government way of working. And that's what we are now working together with in the SJY program with Government of Bihar, Jivika, particularly Bihar Rural Livelihood Promotion Society, where we are providing the technical assistance in terms of trainings and in many fields, trainings of the grassroots workers, trainings of the mid-level supervisors, even kind of mentoring the other senior managers, district level officials, so that it sets in into the, it sinks well and it is well aligned with the existing structure of Jivika, this new program. That is one part of the imparting the training, but we also have as a part of the technical assistance, the implementation. Ultimately, that is extremely important. So we also do handholding support for implementation to the dedicated Jivika team, right from the grassroots. We call them master resource persons at the community level to the district nodals and district resource persons. So that continuous training and implementation support is there. Then, of course, inputs for digitization, for MIS, for M&E, and also some kind of, I would say, some kind of inputs to the community organization, like as Mr. Balamurugan said, that one unique thing of this Jivika model is it is community owned. So communitization is also a critical part, which was not there in our earlier models when we were doing it ourselves. So here also building the capacities, strengthening and onboarding the community organizations like the village organizations or cluster level federations, that also comes in and where our inputs are relevant. So this is in a nutshell our journey from standalone NGO efforts to now getting on board with the government systems for scaling up the Ultra-Pro graduation program, which we call targeting the hardcore poor program in Banda. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Mrs. Chaudhary. This was, you really sort of made it a lot more exciting by also telling us the stories from the early days, how the entire genesis happened and how your experience has been across the time. And also the fact that there are other other organizations have also found very similar results to what we have been finding. So this is really great to know. So now what I'm going to do is, and also we are running a slightly short on time, so I will now quickly move to the next session of this panel discussion, where we will do the first round of question and answers. And I would really request the panelists to keep their answers shorter so that we also have time for audience Q&A. So first, I would like to invite Colin again. And Colin, for you, I have a very specific question, where you also mentioned this State of Economic Inclusion 2021 report that PEI published very recently. And in the report, you make a very strong case for the potential of a broad range of economic inclusion programs that can have transformational impacts across a range of contexts. So my question to you is that what kind of evidence needs are most crucial for low and middle income countries to reap the benefits of such programs? And what are some critical features that M&E systems need to have to support the successful implementation of such complex and multidimensional programs at scale? So Colin, it will be great if you could just share some of your insights on this.
Thanks so much. And just to be clear, Shagun, this is the final round. I know you had two questions for me, but I think we're putting everything into one. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there is one round which is going to focus on implementation, but that is going to be for Mr. Bala and Mr. Chaudhary. So
wonderful.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to try and just keep my intervention to 4 minutes or so. Let's see how we go. Stop me, please, because you're controlling the time. So one thing I really do want to make clear, the central question anybody will ask from a government perspective or otherwise is, well, what's the evidence? What information do you have? Evidence is important to drive the success of programs, also critically important in terms of motivating the decisions at higher level to actually invest in these programs as well. So important on a number of different levels. What I wanted to do was to take stock of some of the key findings from the SCI report, some of the key gaps. I've included our Twitter handle there because that's also a great way for you to go onto the website and get various parts of the study and download it, including the Javika SJY case study. Before going into this very elaborate slide, I do want to make the case, though, while this slide presents information on the overall findings from various impact evaluations, this is not just a story of impact evaluation, as your question indicates. I think there's a big focus here on looking at detailed blue chip evaluative findings, but also putting a huge effort on real-time program monitoring, on operational resources for real-time program correction, on innovation, particularly in the COVID-19 context in terms of data access. And I think some of the other speakers will also address these points. But in terms of some of the key findings then from the SCI report, let me highlight just a couple. This slide on impact, we look to unpack the evidence, and it shows a couple of different things. The left-hand side shows a summary of evidence of overall impact, and it basically shows reasons to be really optimistic in terms of looking at some of the key findings and looking at some of the key objectives of these programs to see that we are seeing important outcomes at very different levels, whether that's income and revenue, consumption findings, employment diversification, or women's empowerment, which I'll speak to in a little bit more detail in one moment. So I think that I'm not going to go into each of these in a lot of detail, but the key message here is to say that we do actually have good, sustained evaluative findings to suggest that a bundle of interventions actually has a greater impact compared to just standalone programs. The other part of the story in terms of evidence gaps and information, we must give huge credit to organizations like Bandan and BRAC for being path breakers in setting evidence bases in the first place. We realize that a massive amount of information comes from non-government programs on the right-hand side, less information coming from programs at scale. So this is where the energy is going to be over the next couple of years. Let me switch over to the next slide. The following slide captures this idea of what are the critical knowledge gaps and the new wave of evidence that are coming out of government programs. As part of the SCI report, we took stock of the research pipeline coming from these government programs, and it's massive. And the governments are looking at a number of different questions. I'm not going to go into all of the examples here, but I think some of the key issues that are coming out, one, heterogeneity of impact across different population groups. So let's get back to the discussion of your target groups and making these decisions at the upstream. What do these outcomes look like if you're designing a program for women? What does it look like if you're designing a program for youth, adolescent girls? If it's more disadvantaged populations, if it's disability groups, the heterogeneity and the impacts are all going to vary. A second question here, looking at the impact of varying components. The average number of components across the 200 plus programs that we surveyed, the average number of components was 5 or 6. We thought on government programs, they might be kind of down to 2 or 3 and people will be skimping as they moved along and they moved to scale. But no, there were 5 or 6. And there's a massive question there in terms of understanding how these components interface, what's the added value of one versus the other, how do they all come together? I'm running short on time, so let me move to the next slide. A massive debate here when we look at the questions of evidence is not only looking at the impact outcomes, but also the costs. So what is the cost of these outcomes? I don't have a lot of time, but what I do want to say is that one of the major contributions of our report was to really put this question of cost front and center in a very accessible way. We've seen a lot in the literature, discussions on average costs for programs. And when we averaged and we documented these average costs, we got a massive range of different program costs per program over a specified duration. But we're realizing that we're not often comparing apples and oranges, and questions of adequacy and dosage are really difficult and complex to understand. But from a practitioner perspective, what's really important is trying to have your thumbnail on your cost structure as well, to understand what your cost structure of your program looks like. So in this slide, we give some examples of various programs. Sorry, if you can go back to the last slide, just to the thumbnails, if you could move back to the previous slide. We take a breakdown of what these different interventions look like. And this is new information for various government counterparts to have at their hands to understand the overall cost of delivery and where your components are coming in at. And I'm going to leave this slide. I'm not going to go on to the last slide for the interests of time. But I think one key message that comes out of this slide is that there is a dominant cost, especially in most of these programs, which is the cash transfer, which is some form of grant. And if you can build on these programs, we're seeing that we can potentially keep costs low. And we have some great experiences, particularly in West Africa, to show that this truly is the case. And I think that's an experience echoed also under the JIVICA program. My last question to you, and I'll just answer it. Actually, I really think I don't have time to answer it. It was your question on M&E systems, but I think Doris will go into those in a little bit more detail, and maybe in the Q&A I can come back to that. Let me stop there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Colin. And I think this was really fantastic to see, especially your slide on costs as well, because one of the big debates, and those who are really the proponents of UBI type of approach or completely going, and just transferring money and transferring cash to people, for them, sometimes programs such as the graduation approach seem to come in with a lot of other costs, requiring a lot of administrative capacity. So it was really good to see this analysis that you've shown. So I'll quickly now move to Doris. And Doris, Colin has already given us a hint of what you're going to be talking about, which is great, because my question was basically to say that, Co-Impact's approach emphasizes engagement between government and civil society leaders, commitment to learning using data and evidence, and emphasis on innovation and continual improvement. So my question is that based on your experience, what can the evaluation and implementing organizations do to adopt a scaling approach from the very beginning? So over to you, Doris.
Thank you, Sagan, and I'm sorry if I'm letting everyone down and I'm not going to be talking about M&E systems, but I wanted to take a step back and share a couple of reflections on, before heading into the technocratic of the M&E system. And one is, what we think is super important is really the ability to listen. What struck me from my last visit to Bihar was the number of times I heard your team, Sagan, ask Mr. Bala and his team, what is it that you need? What do you hope to achieve? And how can we support you? So I think starting from there is really very important, understanding what the system leaders are grappling with, what's the questions and challenges they're trying to face. And then with that, bring a willingness to use your tools and expertise to help solve the issues that they're facing. And we saw that, in the context of COVID when it hit last year. Both Bundin and JIVICA and JPAL were very flexible and responsive in thinking about how to deal with that situation. What's the new questions coming up, and then how JPAL, from a research perspective and ability to bring data, could help with answering some of those questions. And so Bundin could come along with their technical expertise and work out what needs to be done with course correction to make sure these households do not fall out, out of the program. Then on the flip side of that is, listening to the voices closest to the ground. And this is where I was reflecting on Mr. Debashish saying how the Bundin program started on targeting the ultra poor, really listening to the perspective of the people you're trying to serve, what works and what doesn't work for them. Why is a Didi not turning up to a training or a group meeting? Is it because they have care responsibilities? Is it because the meeting place is too far? I'm sure it's the kind of thing that if you ask the people, you'll know pretty soon. And another recollection that I have is that JIVICA Didis are in the community are the best innovators. So how are you building a system that can capture this wealth of information of voices from the community, from the frontline workers who wake up every day and worry about this? It's invaluable for helping the initiative stay rooted and relevant. And also, how are you doing this in a way that truly gives people voice and agency and ownership of the program? And I know Mr. Bala is thinking a lot about that in the communitization of the SJY program. So then maybe I'll just skip to, the last point that I'll make here is then really think from the start of what's the long-term vision you want to aim for. What's your North Star? What would it look like? What would good look like in 10 years' time? What are the outcomes on the people and at system level you'd hope to achieve? Because there's a million things that you can do. All of them can spend you a lot of time to perfect, and therefore it's really key that you make sure you keep an eye on what's most important and plan for it in that way. With that, I will stop and hand it back to you, Sagan.
Okay, thanks a lot, Doris. And I really like that you also brought a very critical point that, we have actually not really emphasized so much, is the learning from the frontline workers' own experience and how they are innovators. They are, implementing this program on the ground. They are seeing what the needs of these different participants are and how they are pivoting and, taking the context into account. So I really think that, and I know I am coming back to this, the M&E systems thing, which which is a little bit dry, but I do think that to develop such dynamic M&E systems that can also not just be sort of top down in nature and just be based on the needs that the policymakers may have in terms of seeing how the implementation is going, because that's what the purpose is of M&E systems. But how can we make them a little bit more flexible so that they're also kind of allowing for this type of knowledge that is being created on the go to come in and go all the way up and inform all of our learning. So those were some really great perspectives. So with this, I'll now turn us and zoom in a little bit more on Bihar. So we have been touching on Bihar. Mr. Bala gave us a great overview at the very beginning. But Bihar is actually sort of a really fantastic case study of all of this that we've been talking about. And the fact is that for Mr. Bala, the question that I have for you is that over 2 short years, SGY program has identified, enrolled, and begun implementing the various dimensions of this multidimensional program to reach 100,000 ultra-poor households. And despite the havoc which is being created by the pandemic, the program has continued to support and provide social protection to the poorest of the poor in the state. As a policy maker spearheading this effort, what, according to you, are critical needs that must be met for successful scaling up? What are the crucial M&E requirements from a government lens that must be met to enable real-time monitoring and course correction? So over to you, Mr. Bala.
Thank you, Shagun, and thank you, Colin, and again Doris for mentioning some of the things which I'm going to talk again, maybe at the cost of repetition. I'll take first scaling up issue, that aspects which are required to do scaling up of this kind of a program. The most important requirement is HR, competent human resource. You need to have dedicated structure. Particularly, you cannot just give this as a separate additional responsibility to existing manpower. So you need to have a separate structure at SPM at state level, district level, and then most importantly, ground level functionaries. So that particular structure is the most crucial requirement to do scaling up. That we have done, and we have to create a structure also feedback mechanism. And also, you need to have good partners. When I say good partners, I've already mentioned we have Bandhan Konehar, they are doing it. And then we have Co-Impact to support us in form of funding. And then we have JPAL as a process monitoring partner, M&E partner. And we are also taking, help from everyone, who can help us. So that is good partner is second requirement. And you need to have an operational guidelines and then clear-cut understanding how this. And then this has to go down the line till MRP, till VO, because this program, when you are identifying 100,000 families, that is being done by village organization. It's more than 324 blocks, thousands of villages. You need to take this message without any dilation to these people. So you need to have that kind of a system strengthening. You need to have a resource pool. You need to have guidelines. You need to have IEC material. You have to have training modules to train all these people. So that is again a basic requirement to do scaling up. These are all the system strengthening aspects. And then you need to have the most important requirement again is you need to have a functional MIS. When I say functional MIS, you need to have a real-time data gathering mechanism. There's no point in knowing something happened to MIS after 6 months. So that's not going to help you. So you need to have a real-time data gathering mechanism, that kind of IT infrastructure, digital infrastructure that we started creating from day one. So and then so for real-time data gathering, you need to have mobile-based applications that we have. So that is also one crucial element which is needed for scaling up, and also for not only for scaling up and also for to know what is happening. And then process evaluation. Once again, I'm just combining both the questions in one. When I say these things, this is also crucial requirement of scaling up. Because in scaling up, when you are reaching 40,000 families, 30,000 families, when you are not knowing these things, you will be doing permanent damage to the program. So that's the reason process evaluation, where you're getting the feedback about quality of implementation. So that is, and then you take quick feedback from process monitoring, and then take quick decisions. The course correction is extremely important. We have done course correction on so many occasions based on the process monitoring mechanism. And then Doris actually mentioned about taking feedback. That is also, we are having a strong feedback mechanism, not only in the form of when you are having meetings, evaluation meetings, review meetings, you take feedback and then act upon it. And we are also created a help desk and then a call center management system, where through which we are taking feedback from the families also, not only from the implementation mechanism partners. We are taking feedback in a very structured way from community, and also particularly from the beneficiary. I should not use the word beneficiary, the ultra poor households. So these are all the important requirement. And in fact, the most important requirement is, you need to believe in the system, believe in the idea of this very graduation model. If you are not having any belief, and then whatever you do, it's not going to, succeed. So that is also one of the crucial requirement. And then I already mentioned about M&E requirement. That's very, very important for us to take decisions and do course correction. We are doing it from day one. When we started pilot, from that pilot onwards, when we started rolling out this program, when we are already crossed more than 1 lakh families, we are going to identify each and every family who are in this category, and then they will be part of SLG, and then they will be taken out of poverty. That is the motto of this program. I'm confident with this kind of a system which is in place, with support from all the partners who are who spoke today, we will succeed in this endeavor of lifting this more than lakh families from permanent poverty. And I need to mention this is very, very satisfying program, because you can see families coming out of poverty. Because I visited myself so many families, absolutely not able to even speak. So that's the reason this approach is extremely important. And I would like to add this also, Colin, with the evidence he spoke, I can say this much: this is extremely cost-effective program. As far as I can talk about this SRLM implemented program, we are using our own, which is doing it. Actually, their work is also poverty elevation. So that particular system which is existing is also being used. For example, one example I will give, I'll maybe take a minute or two. Account opening is one of the important requirements when you are identifying the family. So we have a strong FI team. So when we know that this is taking time, and we are involving FI team to do that. And then one more crucial aspect of this program, as far as Jivika is concerned, convergence, strong convergence aspect. For example, all the families should be included under National Food Security Act for food security. So we have a in-house mechanism. This again a part of the larger mandate for Jivika. So this program is is given a special attention, and then that is also being not only food security, and then housing and all these aspects I have mentioned in the graduation indicator. Or all government programs, through convergence, we are ensuring that these families are getting access, and then they are getting benefited. So I stop here, and I need to take this opportunity to thank all my partners, all our partners, for helping us in doing this program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bala, for your kind words, and for giving us some really, very thoughtful responses to the questions I posed. I think this is really giving a lot of our audience who are here an insight into what it really takes to incorporate this kind of a program into the existing system, especially when working in states where resources are constrained, where administrative capacity is constrained, and what are the different trade-offs that you have to take care of. So we unfortunately have only 2 minutes left, and that means that we don't have time for the audience Q&A. But and we have received some really interesting questions. So what I can do is that maybe I can try and take one big question, which is essentially, if there is time. So I'll just quickly ask this one question that has come for Mr. Bala, where he's asking that how do we ensure that households do not fall back again in the poverty trap after graduating from the ultra poor through the SJY program?
So I already mentioned about that particular aspect, because once I mentioned that when families get included without this program, we found this ultra poor families, they were dropping out of SHG whole. Right now, we are ensuring they are becoming part of SHG, and then that continuous help from SHG is also going to be available. And then, as I said, this program is going to continue, and then capacity. And as I said, it's a community-owned program, and village organization is going to play a very important role in handholding them, and program is also going to be there. So I think it's not a very easy answer to give, but I'm trying to, I think I've answered this question. It's not an easy job. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's not as easy. I was just telling, it's a tough job, but I'm confident it's going to be successful, and then they'll be having some this kind of a mechanism to help, to get help.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Mr. Bala. So I would just now like to wrap up and thank all my panelists for joining us. And Mr. Chaudhary, I'm sorry, we didn't get time to ask your question, which was a really important one. But I did want you to just end with a couple of sentences, Mr. Chaudhary, if you could just tell us about your experience of moving from a direct implementation mode to providing, support to governments. So if you could just summarize what your experience has been on that in just 2 sentences, that will be great. Mr. Chaudhary, can you hear me?
Shagun, I think I'm having a network problem, and it's tethering. It's just not coming smoothly. So I would rather request you to go ahead and wrap it up, because you might not be able to hear me.
Okay. Sure, Mr. Chaudhary, that sounds good. So I'll just again, in addition to thanking all the panelists, I would really like the audience to take away some really key messages from the experience that we have shared today, and that is the fact that a lot of times, there is this pessimism that the NGOs are doing these types of programs, and how can big governments really absorb these? And of course, there are many factors that have to be in place for this kind of shift to happen. But I think what this case study is showing to us is that it is possible. And what it really needs is, there are certain things that have to be in place, starting from a highly motivated government who's really trying to solve a problem and is acknowledging that the current efforts are not reaching everyone, and that inclusivity is an important aspect, to going all the way to having partners who come together and can really help them achieve this kind of a mission and vision. And I think one of the things that we must acknowledge is that yes, this program is complex, it is multifaceted, and it does require a lot of support and investments. But at the same time, the problem that we are trying to solve is also a problem which is highly complex, and it continues to persist. And we've used the words poverty traps. We've used the fact that the nature of what we are trying to change is also very complex and complicated, and it also persists. So I do think that I hope that all the audience have are walking away with a more optimism to say that evidence-based policy can be a reality. And it does require an ecosystem of partnerships and a lot of dialogues, a lot of shared goals to come together to achieve this. So thank you all. And if there are any questions, we can also forward you our answers through DMEO. Thank you. And I would also like to thank DMEO for giving us this opportunity to host this panel. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Shagun. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.